The story of the Philippine Navy in the modern era can be captured through one ship, the BRP Rajah Humabon, PS-11. Originally commissioned as USS Atherton, DE-169 in 1943, this cannon-class destroyer escort fought in the Atlantic during World War II, hunted German submarines, and survived a global war. Yet until 2018, it was still in active service under the Philippine flag. For decades, it stood as the flagship of the Philippine Navy, even as every naval modernization program stalled or failed. The irony was clear. A country of more than 7,000 islands, facing maritime disputes in the South China Sea, depended on an 80-year-old warship to defend its sovereignty. Why did the Philippines rely on ships like Rajah Humabon long after they had become obsolete? The reasons are both economic and political. For most of the Cold War and the decades that followed, Manila devoted its limited defense budget to internal security, counterinsurgency against communist rebels and separatist groups in Mindanao, rather than external defense. Defense spending rarely exceeded 1% of GDP, and whatever small naval acquisitions occurred came mostly through U.S. military assistance. Washington supplied hand-me-down ships, including ex-World War II escorts and patrol craft, which became the backbone of the Philippine fleet. The arrangement seemed sufficient while the U.S. Navy maintained a massive presence at Subic Bay and Clark Air Base. Once the Americans left in 1992, however, the inadequacy of this strategy became painfully obvious. Rajah Humabon and its contemporaries, such as BRP Miguel Malvar, BRP Pangasinan, and BRP Cebu, had very limited combat value. Armed with outdated 76mm guns, a handful of smaller weapons, and sensors that belonged in a museum, they had no anti-ship missiles, no sonar, and no air defense systems. Their real role was presence patrols and ceremonial duties, not actual combat. When China began asserting expansive claims in the South China Sea in the 1990s and 2000s, Manila found itself facing modern frigates and Coast Guard cutters with little more than relics of World War II. The 2012 Scarborough Shoal standoff demonstrated the consequences. The Philippines could not enforce its own claims when confronted with a stronger adversary. This mismatch between threat and capability created a strategic crisis. The Philippine Navy was derided as a floating museum, the weakest in Southeast Asia. The symbolism of Rajah Humabon still sailing was double-edged. On one hand, it was a testament to Filipino ingenuity and resourcefulness in keeping an ancient ship running. On the other, it highlighted the structural neglect of maritime defense and the fragility of Philippine sovereignty at sea. By the late 2010s, the decision to finally decommission Rajah Humabon was not only about retiring an old hull, it was about signaling the end of an era of underinvestment and denial. The question is what comes next. Beginning with the revised AFP Modernization Act and the Horizon programs, Manila committed to reversing decades of neglect. Horizon 2 brought in 2 Jose Rizal-class frigates from South Korea, based on the HDF 2600 design. These were the first purpose-built modern warships the Philippines had ever acquired. Offshore patrol vessels are in the pipeline, also from Hyundai, to replace aging ships in constabulary roles. The acquisition of the BrahMos coastal defense missile system from India marks a major shift, providing for the first time a credible anti-ship strike capability. Manila has also invested in radars from Israel and Japan to build an early warning network, and Horizon 3 envisions even more ambitious steps, including the possible acquisition of submarines. This shift is not just about equipment. It is about redefining the role of the Philippine Navy. For decades, the Navy's job was essentially to show the flag, patrol against pirates, and support the Coast Guard. Today, in the face of Chinese assertiveness, Manila is trying to build a Navy capable of denial, able to make the South China Sea too dangerous for hostile forces, even if it cannot achieve outright parity. From this perspective, the contrast between the Rajah Humabon and the BrahMos system is stark. One represents an era where the Philippines sailed into contested waters with World War II guns. The other is a supersonic missile designed to sink modern warships. Yet ambition does not automatically translate into capability. Horizon 3, with an estimated budget of 1.6 trillion pesos, roughly 28 billion US dollars, is the largest modernization plan in Philippine history. But the Philippine economy remains vulnerable, dependent on remittances and external investment, and political will is often inconsistent. Past modernization phases have been delayed or downsized. The risk is that Manila acquires a handful of modern assets while still relying on legacy ships for much of its daily operations, creating a fleet that is modern on paper, but limited in practice. The departure of Rajah Humabon and her World War II sisters may close one chapter, but the shadow of underinvestment lingers. There is also the geopolitical context. The Philippines is not modernizing in a vacuum. Its choices are embedded in a larger alliance system. The U.S. has returned to Philippine bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. Japan is supplying radars and considering defense equipment transfers. Australia and the U.S. conduct joint patrols with the Philippine Navy. In this sense, Manila's modernization is both about self-strengthening and about making itself a more credible ally in the Indo-Pacific coalition balancing China. Whether it buys submarines from France, Korea, or another supplier, the decision will be framed not only in terms of naval tactics, but also grand strategy. The symbolism of Rajah Humabon therefore becomes even more powerful in hindsight. For years, the Philippine Navy literally sailed history into the South China Sea. The decommissioning of the last World War II warship is both a moment of pride and a sobering reminder of vulnerability. It underscores why Manila now feels compelled to invest in missiles, frigates, and possibly submarines. The gap between what it had and what it needs could not be more striking. The lesson is simple. No country can secure its maritime claims in the 21st century with 20th century relics. The journey from floating museum to modern navy is still uncertain. Can the Philippines overcome its budgetary and institutional constraints? Can it deliver Horizon 3 on schedule? Or will it be another cycle of delays and compromises? Most importantly, can it build a force credible enough to deter China, or will it continue to rely overwhelmingly on U.S. protection? These are not academic questions. They go to the heart of Philippine sovereignty and the balance of power in the South China Sea. In the end, Rajah Humabon is more than an old ship. It is a symbol of what happens when maritime defense is neglected. And it is also a marker for the turning point where Manila recognized that the cost of inaction had become too high. The future of the Philippine Navy will determine whether the country remains a weak link in regional security or emerges as a credible actor in its own right. That is why the story of a single World War II warship matters, not for nostalgia, but for what it reveals about strategy, choices, and survival in a contested sea. If you want to continue following these deep dives into military modernization and the strategic dilemmas of countries like the Philippines, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and sharing with others. Your support helps us bring more analysis and uncover the big questions behind the headlines.